And it was that kind of duality that kind of jumped out at me. These places are operating on different levels.
Those things happen when you're on your own and you're engaged with what's actually going on around you.
If you are prepared to leave behind the known and the familiar, then you are gifted with this opportunity to see the world in a very different way.
But they are finding meaning in joining this path, and they're finding something resonates with them.
Welcome to the Being Human podcast with Amelia Vegting and Jez Francis. Brought to you by Just Add Water.
Hello, I'm Amelia Vegting.
And I'm Jez Francis. Welcome to the Being Human podcast, where with special guests, we continue to explore what it means to be human in this world we find ourselves living in. Amelia, I've had a thought.
Oh, that's dangerous.
Yep, I know. I think you're going to like this one, though.
Go on.
I think we should jump straight into my favourite part of the podcast.
Oh, why not? We haven't done that in a while. Yes, let's begin this episode with boring things about me. I'm loving your enthusiasm for it.
When people see me, they tend to turn away because I'm boring.
The part of the podcast where we acknowledge and celebrate the more mundane aspects of our human existence.
Yes, it's the moments that fill much of our days, in between the brief encounters with excitement. Well, they do mine anyway. Amelia, you kick us off.
Well, mine is actually all about my nightmare morning that happened today. First of all, I woke up to the sensation of me scratching my own arms.
Oh, you're making me itch.
I know. Wondering what on earth was going on. And then as I was lying there going, oh my God, how many times have I been bitten? I just hear that dreaded noise that you never want in your room. The zzz, as it,
yeah, I know
the mosquito just whizzes past your head. So immediately start checking how much dinner this mosquito has had. And I've got 7 bites and they were just painfully itchy. So I've decided that I'm probably not getting back to sleep. Pick up my phone and open the New York Times Games app and begin connections.
Yes. How'd you get on?
It's an absolute disaster. Didn't get a single one. It was a complete failure. And then I get up out of bed and I knock a water glass from my bedside table. That actually ends up smashing on the floor. Eventually get myself together to be able to leave the house and walking to the recording studio. It is a very windy and miserable day here in London. And my umbrella is turning inside out like there's no tomorrow, moving so aggressively in the wind that it's now actually broken. So I'm going to have to get myself a new umbrella as well. So overall, it's been a bit of a morning disaster. What have you got for us today, Jez?
I watched a man replace a huge billboard and I could not take my eyes off it, what he was doing.
You're hooked.
The whole procedure. Guess how long it took from start to finish?
I actually have no idea, but what I can put my money on is whether it was only a couple of minutes or 2 hours long. You will have stayed and watched the entire process from start to finish.
Yeah,
but how long was it?
Before this, if you'd said to me, how long would it take to replace one of those huge posters?
Yeah.
I'd have said, I'd imagine paste brushes and having to scrape off the whole thing. I would have thought hours, yeah. But it literally took about less than 5 minutes.
Nice.
So as soon as he arrived and started, I was just completely transfixed. I did not know this is what the fix that I've been looking for all these years. He firstly sort of opened up the edges of this huge billboard like an enormous photo frame. And that revealed these sort of loops that were attached to the canvas sort of poster. And then there was this long wire that was kind of fed all the way through the loops. And the wire itself was around these 4 kind of pulleys at each corner. He just loosened the wire, first of all, unclipped all the hooks, took the old poster out, attached the new one to the loops, tensioned it back up, cranking this sort of thing, and then closed all the edges, click, 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 like a family photo frame.
Done.
And that was it, done. And I could not take my eyes off it. And do you know the funny thing?
Oh, you didn't go and talk to him about it, did you? Poor man.
No, me, talk to a complete stranger. No, I didn't on this occasion. What I was going to say was that I've got absolutely no memory whatsoever of what either the old poster or the new poster were about in terms of the ads. It was the process.
So the ad got completely to the back of the brain.
Yeah, gone. Okay, enough of that. Let's now get into today's topic, a theme that is as old as humanity itself, and that is journeys. So when you hear that word, Amelia, what do you think of?
I immediately think of travelling, sitting in the car as a family playing lorry cricket, which is a great game, by the way. I also think of the journey that my best friend Kirsty and I did for 7 months before going to university. I guess travelling is the first thing that comes to mind, really.
And what's the most memorable journey you've ever taken, do you think?
I mean, I think definitely that year out before going to university has to be one of them. I wrote a journal of my whole every day for the whole time that we were away, which is one of my favourite things to go back and have a read of, to see what we were doing on, the 27th of March in 2016. But there is one specific journey. It's the drive from my family home to Liverpool on my first day heading to university. The boot filled with bedding and elements from home, and dad driving, mum in the front, me in the back, sat next to, suitcases full of clothes and hockey kit and whatever else. Funnily enough, we, at the age of 19, weren't playing lorry cricket anymore. But I actually remember being really quite nervous. I don't think I said very much in the car on the way up there. You've got all the thoughts running through your mind of, who you're going to be living with. Will they like me? What if they think I'm a bit weird?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, as you've now discovered. But, just staring out the car kind of with the radio in the background, just watching, one motorway turn into another. And then suddenly I was in my little room making up my bed and putting some pictures on the walls and reflecting on it. It was a car journey up various motorways across England, but it was also the real beginning of a huge chapter of my life where I'd spend the next 3 years, which is probably why I think it sticks out to me so much now.
You touched on something there about, that they don't have to involve passports or long flights necessarily. They can be quite personal, and the reflection is often kind of what you learn about yourself in that sense, isn't it? As you come out of the other side, the girl who arrived in Liverpool age 19 was quite different to the young woman that left 3 years later.
Yeah, definitely. And it wasn't just my ability to nail a Scouse accent that changed.
Yeah, for the listeners, let's not.
No, let's not do that. Question for you, rather than a specific memorable journey story, what is it about journeys that you like?
I think there's something fairly common to most journeys that I take anyway, whether we're talking to other countries, planned for weeks in advance, or just popping to the supermarket to grab a pint of milk. And that is that they very rarely unfold as planned. And it's in those departures from the journey that I'd mapped out in my head where fun or frustration often lives, and that the memorable things happen, and where I learn about myself and others or places. The other weekend, good example, just the other weekend, I was on my way to my parents' house and I got a flat tyre. So I had to come off the motorway and find a quick fit to get a replacement fitted. So I had about 90 minutes to kill whilst this tyre was being replaced. So the dog and I went for a walk to Rye Park in High Wycombe, where I hadn't been since I was a child. So we're talking a long, long, long time ago. And all these memories came flooding back about the people and the things that had happened all those years ago. And it sounds like I'm back in boring things about me, doesn't it?
So we've moved on from that section.
But anyway, the unexpected parts of journeys, which if we choose to see in a different way, can offer all manner of things. And I think they're my favourite parts about journeys.
Well, someone who knows a lot when it comes to journeys is today's guest. Should we bring them into the conversation?
Yes, let's do that. That's more than enough from you and I. Joining us on today's episode is Oliver Smith, an award-winning travel writer whose stories have graced Lonely Planet, FT Weekend, The Times and Outside Magazine. Ollie has earned the title Travel Writer of the Year in the UK 4 times, as well as the Lowell Thomas Gold Award from Outside Magazine in the US for excellence in travel journalism. His latest work, On This Holy Island, A Modern Pilgrimage Across Britain, reimagines pilgrimage, not just as a spiritual duty, but as a richly layered exploration of meaning. Ollie takes us on a unique journey, one that walks ancient footpaths, sleeps inside tombs and sea caves, and even finds pilgrimage in places as unexpected as football stadiums and pubs. His book is thoughtful, playfully profound. I loved it. I've read it. And we're really thrilled to have him with us today. Ollie, welcome to the Being Human podcast.
Thanks very much for having me. That's very kind, everything you've just said.
All true, I hope.
Yeah, 80% true.
Ollie, we're going to begin by asking you just a couple of questions to get to know you as a person before diving into today's subject, if that's all right with you.
Of course, of course.
If your life as a travel writer had a soundtrack, what would be the opening track?
Probably Let It Go from the Disney movie Frozen.
Nice.
I don't like the song, and I don't think I ever did like it. But it's just what plays in my car now whenever I go anywhere, just because I've got kids and it's all they ever want to listen to. So it just kind of haunts me and has wormed its way into my head in a really quite sinister and unhappy way.
Nice.
And I'm sure there was an era when I was in a car journey and we were listening to really interesting music or podcasts or whatever, but I can't really remember that now.
My mum and dad used to say with me and my brother was the Mickey Mouse Club song that we used to listen to over and over again. And they'd be like, and one more time and then we're done. And then the next
Is that
thing...
the one that goes, who's the leader of that one?
Yeah. So imagine how irritating that is to listen to travelling wherever you're going.
In our car, Henry dropped he had a Power Ranger toy that was battery operated and it started speaking every time you moved it.
Oh, yeah,
and
right.
he dropped it and it went under the seat and it fell down into the chassis of the car and I couldn't get it. And every time I turned right, the car started saying Power Rangers or something. I can't remember what it was. And I just thought to myself,
how long would the battery
last?
last?
The battery will only last a month or two at most. 4 years later, it was still doing it. And it still did it when I went to sell the car as well.
It sounds a bit more like a haunting than
I've got a question for you. Sunrise or sunset? Which one and why?
I'd probably go sunrise just because there's fewer people around and it can be a bit more of a personal experience, probably.
Is there a film or TV show that you can quote almost word for word?
I'd say probably the closest thing is probably With Nell and I, and I'm probably not unique in that respect. I guess it is a movie of kind of constant, incredible quotes. They probably kind of exist independently in my mind, and I actually need to watch the film again to see how it all links up. That's a profoundly unoriginal choice.
I've not seen that.
Have you not? It's a brilliant movie. You'd love it. I have a celebrity claim to fame with Richard E. Grant, who's played the main protagonist. A lifetime ago, I filled his car up with petrol.
Oh, wow.
At Hammersmith Flyover.
Classic Jez at a petrol station.
Yeah, really, really. I am the world's most boring person. But I always remember he's incredibly good looking and his eyes, I mean, they just light you up. I mean, he's a strikingly handsome man.
I will watch the film then.
Yeah, you should. Yeah.
What an honour to fill up his car. Do you remember what it was? Was it diesel or petrol? Or...
I think it was just regular unleaded. And I'm not a particularly sort of car person, but I don't remember it being particularly ostentatious or showy, which I was quite relieved about, actually.
You and him are the same.
Ollie, who do you most admire and why?
That's a tricky question. I guess when you're a writer, you often kind of have certain writers that are kind of like guiding stars for you, I guess. And for me, it would be people like Laurie Lee or maybe Bruce Chapman was a kind of big influence on me as well. I guess thinking about the world today, I'd probably say Zelensky. I feel like the world's falling apart at the moment and there's very few people holding it together. I'd say he's probably the guy who is facing down so much of the insanity in the world. And there are so few sane people in charge in the world.
In many ways, I think that's where certainly I found great comfort in your book, actually. Finding connection and meaning in this sometimes unfathomable world we find ourselves living in it can be a source of great comfort, I think.
What was life like for you growing up? And, when did you know that writing and travel would play a big part in your life?
Travel probably from being a teenager and going on some of those formative journeys. At university, I just worked lots of part-time jobs, which was quite easy because I did an English degree where you sort of only need to show up once a month, really. But I just sort of saved up money to go traveling in the summer holidays, and that was my great passion. So, and then I went to journalism school to do a postgraduate, and that's probably what set me off on the path to being a journalist. And yeah, I've been doing it for, I guess, about 15 years now. It's not always an easy way to kind of make money and earn a living, but it's always a rewarding one.
Were there writers and journalists in your family? Were you surrounded by people like that?
No, absolutely. No, not really. No, I'd say no. There are some journalists in my family. I could never really read what they wrote or reported on because they're Welsh language speakers.
Oh, okay.
Ah.
In your book on this holy island, you talk about reframing pilgrimage in Britain. What inspired you to explore this idea?
It was kind of something that happened a little bit by accident. I did a couple of stories on pilgrimage places. I got asked to do one around Iona, and then I sort of pitched an idea of about the centenary of Walsingham, which I just sort of did these stories, and I thought there's something interesting here. These places are operating on different levels. On the one hand, this is a location in the United Kingdom. It looks a little bit like a kind of classic Norfolk village that you might just sort of drive through and think, oh, that looks rather lovely. And there's a tea room, and there's a cricket pitch and all the rest of it. But for some people that coming, it was working on a different level. It was a place where the Virgin Mary had appeared. It was a place that had been set aside by divinity as being a special place. And it was that kind of duality that kind of jumped out at me, this idea that within our country, there were places that sort of hummed at a slightly higher frequency than others. I think that's what initially kind of drew me to writing this book. But I think probably the driving force behind this book, more than anything else, was meeting people. And very little can be said with certainty about any pilgrimage place as to whether is it going to have an effect on you? Did something miraculous happen here? These are quite open-ended questions. But one thing you can say with certainty is you will meet interesting people there. You'll meet people who are often at a pivotal stage of their lives looking for direction. You'll meet people who are often a lot less guarded and who are very quick to open their, tell you their life story and open their heart to you. And they're often places where, these inhibitions that kind of follow us around in everyday life are sort of suspended in a way. And so I tried to make my book as much about talking to as many people as possible and hearing their stories and understanding what their relationship with these places was.
That level of vulnerability that you describe is completely relatable if we're honest with ourselves as well. It's something that we all go through, self-doubt, questioning our existence, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, feeling like you don't have the answers and you sort of look on that hunt for them.
You often do find people in pilgrimage places that have been made redundant or bereaved or have had some life event that they're trying to make sense of. That's part of the kind of heartbeat of all these places, really.
I really like the phrasing you used of these areas sort of hum at a higher frequency.
Yeah.
I think that's a really beautiful way of talking about them. Do you think that a pilgrimage has to have a religious or spiritual dimension, or can it be entirely secular?
I think the thing is it's a really shape-shifting word, and it's a word that people bend in all sorts of different ways. And I guess the answer to that is absolutely pilgrimage can have a secular dimension. It can be purely secular. I'm reluctant to sort of put a definition on that word pilgrimage, but I think it's really the root of it is this human habit of making meaning by making journeys, and that can be done in a secular sense. So, I mean, just to some examples from my book, I mean, the one that jumps to mind right now is the journeys people made to Anfield in the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster. That's been described by academics as being a pilgrimage, as being a journey of meaning, and one that kind of carries on today. I remember I was very fortunate in the course of writing my book to speak to some Hillsborough survivors who walked across the Pennines from Hillsborough to Anfield via all sorts of other stadiums along the way, and that was a journey of meaning for them, and they did use the word pilgrimage there. So I think it can be used in many different ways. I mean, I didn't really get round to this in the book, but I mean, pilgrimage isn't always a positive thing either. I mean, pilgrimage is a word that has been used to describe journeys to the battlefields of the Western Front, also to the concentration camps of the Second World War. A pilgrimage can go through, realms of light. It can go through realms of darkness as well. It's a very hard word to pin down.
And I think perhaps it's exploring what it means for the individual that the meaning kind of reveals itself.
It can only really be it's not for anybody else to tell you what a pilgrimage is and isn't. It's for the individual to decide themselves. I mean, if we start talking about, something a bit more formal, Roman Catholic pilgrimage or Buddhist pilgrimage, or whatever it might be, well, then sure, those things do have, kind of patterns and in some cases rules. But pilgrimage more widely, it can certainly exist separate to organized religion.
They've existed for thousands, millennia, thousands of years. What are the sort of timeless truths that you've observed about why human beings undertake them?
Well, when we talk about pilgrimage, we're normally sort of talking about high medieval pilgrimage in a Christian context. In the Middle Ages, that was the sort of the heyday of pilgrimage in our country. And then there's sort of this sort of sense of Celtic Christian practices in the early days of Christianity, having pilgrimage elements to them, the journeys that those wandering saints and their followers would make. And then when it comes to prehistory, before written sources, it's kind of guesswork about pilgrimage at that point, but it seems just very likely. I mean, it feels that if we sort of look at human history and extrapolate, then there would have been something a bit like pilgrimage taking place in prehistoric times here. That feels likely when you look at the story of Stonehenge, of the deposits made there, of the things brought there. That's something, our word pilgrimage seems to fit quite neatly. Whether these people would have identified with it, we're never going to know. But, timeless truths, again, it's hard to sort of do a one-size-fits-all kind of assessment of it all. But I mean, it does go back to that idea of making meaning by making journeys as being hardwired into the human psyche. I think one thing that sometimes pops up in discussion about pilgrimage is that this might be a kind of a manifestation of a human habit. A manifestation of the fact that we were until extremely recently a nomadic species. We've only been settled for like a blink of an eye in the greater span of human history. We were people who were always on the move, and it's been hypothesized that this is actually a kind of maybe a kind of release valve for our nomadic instincts. This is our way of going back to what we once were. I mean, I guess you're never going to know the answer to that really, but it's convincing argument in my view.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Sort of almost like a DNA kind of memory of something way back when.
I think it could be. I mean, there's arguments that other things from primeval, from the depths of time, are kind of embedded somewhere in our brains. Things like big beasts in the dark and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, it doesn't seem too far-fetched to me.
For me, it seems logical. You move away from things that are dangerous. You move towards things that are important to us, like food and love and procreation and all those kind of things. You can understand why staying put in times gone by didn't serve you well in pursuit of those things.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So,
I mean, the often cited example, I mean, that's famously cited by Bruce Chatwin in the songlines. One example is the baby that needs to be lulled to sleep, and that if you sort of stand still, the baby will keep screaming. But if you start simulating movement, or indeed if you start moving, if you push a pram or get a child in a car, if you start being on your way, then they fall asleep. And it's been suggested that this is because being on the move meant all was well. You'd be going to new hunting grounds, new places to gather things. You are healthy enough to be mobile. So that's something that occasionally pops up in this world.
I've certainly seen Amelia fall asleep on a train or two over the years.
It is the rocking motion of it, and knowing that I'm on my way back to my bed. I am out like a light.
Catching flies.
Catching flies massively. Jez has caught me so many times red-handed on that
wide
one.
open. Yeah.
You've also done it.
I know.
How do you personally distinguish between a journey that is transformative and one that is simply physical movement from place to place?
I think it's not for me personally to distinguish. I think it is for that person too, that's undergoing the journey, to say whether this is a walk to the shops or this is a pilgrimage. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that's down to say. Pilgrimages take so many forms. For some people, it's all about being alone and being solitary and having a kind of conversation with something greater that only solitude will allow for. And for other people, it's all about having the company of people by your side, having that solidarity of all going in the same direction. And then for some people, it's about having a very, a fixed destination at the end. But I mean, I was in Japan last week, and a very popular pilgrimage there is the circular one that goes around in circles on the island of Shikoku. And then there's also pilgrimage schools of people just wandering with no end point. That's also part of it. So it takes so many different forms. And I've heard some people also grumble and say, well, if everything sort of comes under the banner of pilgrimage, doesn't the term become a bit devalued? Someone said to me once, couldn't it just be a lofty word for going for a stroll? I think that's probably there's a reasonable case to make for that. But ultimately, you don't really know what's going through someone's mind when they're going to somewhere. They might be going to somewhere that just looks like quite mundane, quite prosaic, but is actually the scene of something quite traumatic or momentous in their life, and that could be described as a pilgrimage. So yeah, it's just like it slips through the fingers like water, really, this word.
As I read out that question, I was thinking about either journeys that I've found transformative in my life. And until having a conversation like this, I probably never would have used the word pilgrimage in that sense at all. But from what you've been saying throughout this conversation, I think there are some elements where you don't even realise the journey that you're on is going to be so transformational at the time. And perhaps you look back on that specific moment and think, actually, do you know what, that probably could be described as something larger than just moving from place to place.
You sort of cross a threshold into a brave new world, and that can happen with the starting point of a footstep, can't it? For me, I don't know whether the metaphor works, but this idea of if you think of an artist's palette with all the different range of fabulous, vibrant colours, if you keep sort of mixing them all together, you end up with a sort of a horrible kind of sort of brown sort of hue, don't you? And I think in some ways, if you try and boil down the individuality of the word and the experience of it into something that defines everyone's experience of it, it becomes really, really vanilla or bland. Or
absolutely, yeah. It's not really worth even trying to
that was the conclusion.
To make it uniform. It just is so many different things in so many different places.
In the book, something that sort of stuck out to me, and I thought of it earlier on when the point that Amelia made about some places kind of buzzing at a different frequency. You use an expression, kind of thin places, where the distance between us and something else it narrows considerably. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, it's a word often used by people in many different places. It's become very popular, I think, in recent times. Thin places where this sort of membrane between our world and other worlds is a little bit thinner. In fact, it's not just in this country. I mentioned I was in Japan last week. I heard it there as well, or something like it. This idea that there's a veil between this world and something else. It does recur, and in some places, it's kind of porous. It's something that kind of is detectable to some people and not to others. I mean, which is why I like the word frequency, because, some people can pick it up and others people can't. And it is something that, I remember hearing it in Glastonbury a lot, and that's obviously a New Age tradition. And I heard it in Christian places too. I heard it in Ione, I heard it in Walsingham. It does seem to work for people, that word.
Can you train yourself, do you think, to sort of pick up those frequencies or to experience thin places?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't personally. Yeah, I think it's probably to do with a place and time, to do with what state of mind you're in.
Yeah.
And unlike some people, I don't think certain pilgrimage places exist in this slightly kind of shimmering way.
No.
I think it's down to what people make of them. I mean, a big part of pilgrimage that just doesn't really get talked about is just disappointment. It is part and parcel of pilgrimage, disappointment. The idea of, I think, going on a pilgrimage, you carry expectation with you, and you carry preconceptions of what it's going to be like when you go to a place. And you for some people, they'll reach there, Jerusalem, and it'll be wonderful, and they feel their prayers will be answered, and it will deliver everything they want and more. But it's very common, I think, for people to get to the finishing line and think that a ray of light is going to come down and touch them, and that they think that they're going to, that something miraculous is going to happen, and they're going to be on the stage in their own celestial drama, and they find it's just an ordinary Wednesday. This is part and parcel of pilgrimage. The example I often use when I talk about that is the square in in Santiago, the finishing line for what is the most popular pilgrimage in Europe by a huge distance right now. And if you stand there for a day, I was very fortunate to stand there for a day, very much in a cheating way, because I actually just flew in there. I didn't even walk there.
Very honest.
But you see these people, and many people are, they fall to their knees and they feel some huge elation. But then there's a lot of people who are just sort of standing there and staring into space, and you see that this hasn't quite delivered for them in the way they thought it would.
I've walked all this way, and all I've got to show for it is a fridge magnet, or
I mean, and therein a total other intrinsic side of pilgrimage, which is just commercialism and souvenirs and what we might call this is part of pilgrimage now. Come and get your fridge magnet, come and get your souvenir teddy bear, and it has always been part of pilgrimage. If you think about the kind of tokens people would pick up at a shrine in the Middle Ages, and making money and getting money off pilgrims is present around the world and always has been, going and staying in particular kinds of establishments. I mean, there's a very important part of pilgrimage, which is boozing and hedonism. I mean, you don't need to look further than the Canterbury Tales to see that that's part of it. You can see also in Edo era Japan. But I mean, the only way to escape your own postcode and have a knees up was to sort of pretend to be a pilgrim. I mean, it's those two worlds, the spiritual and the secular, they overlap constantly. And yeah, it's not always a lofty endeavor.
When you sort of describing the kind of the disappointment that some people feel, or the sense of feeling underwhelmed perhaps by the experience and expecting something profound to happen to them, I wonder whether. And the reason I ask the question is I think of, Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, where there's that one of the kind of the beats of that is that moment where the hero almost transcends self and realizes that the transformation is actually not about them, but about maybe the effect that they've had on people that they've met on their journey or the community that they represent. And I think back to the point you made earlier on about, the people that you meet when you undertake these journeys and the stories that they share with you and perhaps what they take away from their interactions with you, that there's something, maybe the gift of a journey is less about self and more about other, perhaps, one of service. I don't know. Does the gift come from an external experience, or is it more of an internal thing in your experience?
It's a hard question, and I'll weasel out of it by just saying that's down to the pilgrim to decide again. The internal, external, I think they kind of, if a pilgrimage is going to work for someone, they kind of work in lockstep with each other, really, and that's how it works. I wouldn't go as far as to say any journey I've made. Would I use the word gift of a journey? I don't really know. I think that sounds a little bit, for me personally, that sounds
too contrived, perhaps.
Taking it a bit too far, maybe, for me personally. But I know that would be an appropriate word for some other people.
And how have some of the journeys that you've been on sort of changed your perspective on life or the sense of belonging and connection?
I think I've been extremely lucky in my life because I've travelled extremely widely and extremely regularly. Right from leaving journalism school, I went to work for Lonely Planet, and I was away, a good few times a year, and I've been extremely blessed to see an awful lot of the world. And I think a lot of those sort of journeys, the way they shape you, it's kind of cumulative, and it's not always easy to sort of prize one apart from the other.
Yeah,
I think probably the journey that kind of was the most meaningful for me, the one that shaped me the most, is the first trip I went on my own to somewhere far away. And I think the best advice I can give someone as a traveler, from my point of view, is just to travel on your own, because you're immersed so deeply in a place. You're forced to meet people. You're forced to kind of interact with people in a way that if you're with someone else, you're in a little bubble almost, particularly if they're from your own country. And it's kind of natural for, if you go somewhere in the world backpacking, to fall in with people who look a bit like you and talk a bit like you, but you almost do it, unconsciously. And why wouldn't you? But being on your own and going to somewhere where there aren't many people who are like you, I think that's so edifying, and that's hugely formative. I remember the journey I'm talking about, I think I've been 22. I worked right the summer after leaving university doing a kind of menial admin job. And I remember how much I saved up. I saved under 400 quid and I thought, how far can I get on 400 quid? And I got a budget airline flight as far as Istanbul, and I went to the bus station in Istanbul and looked for the bus that was going the furthest from there. And this would have been before the war, just 2 or 3 years before the war. And I got a bus that went into Syria, and I went backpacking around Syria on my own. And it was just, yeah, that was the journey that kind of probably looms largest in my mind. I'm aware that when I say that, it does make me come across as a little bit of a, well, maybe there's an element of that being a bit of a crass thing to say, because obviously my journey in Syria is not the most significant thing to happen in that neck of the woods when you think about all the horrors that have gone on there since. That's just so sad to see. And it's just not letting up. But I just remember the people that kind of took me in, and I mean, I think I was about 22, but looked about 14 years old for some reason. That's not something I'm lucky enough to have now. Old and haggard now, but I remember like people just sort of taking me in and feeding me out of pity, and people who I couldn't speak I couldn't speak Arabic to them, they couldn't speak English to me, but that was just such a wonderful thing. And I think that was that journey. I mean, I think I would use the word gift for that journey.
I was just going to say that does sound like something, the realization that if you are prepared to leave behind the known and the familiar and the safe harbor of what we see day in, day out, and put yourself in places where everything is different, then you are gifted with this opportunity to see the world in a very different way.
I do think that that piece about travelling on your own, and, some people will be comfortable doing, the type of journey that you've just described, Ollie. But for other people, even just a weekend away on their own where they haven't got a friend or a partner or away with family will be a new experience. I actually went to Barcelona on my own. And one of the things that was so brilliant about it was I queued up at this restaurant, and then they were like, oh, how many people would you like? And I was like, oh, just a table for one. And then they sat me up at the bar where you could see all the chefs preparing all this tapas food. And I was just sat there, and it was the first time I'd actually sat in a restaurant on my own, which is a bit of a different experience compared to when you're usually, immediately got somebody to talk to. And I didn't just want to sit there, which would be the go-to, to just sit on your phone and scroll and not take any of it in. And then I think the chef who was at the station that was directly in front of me was like, are you here on your own? And I was like, yeah, I am. And then he was like, right, what do you eat? And I was like, oh, well, I eat anything. I haven't got any, preferences or dietaries. And he was like, right, how hungry are you? And I was like, pretty hungry. And then he was like, right, do you trust me? And I was like, yeah, go on then. And he just brought out what he thought was going to be, the best selection of the food from that restaurant. And had you have been at a table, not at the bar, with somebody else, those experiences, and that's only, a little small experience, but those things happen when you're on your own and you're present where you are and you're engaged with what's actually going on around you, rather than being, as you say, in your little bubble with the person that you're with in the country that you're in at the restaurant that you're eating at. So
you're just so much more approachable.
Yeah, you are.
And easier to chat to. And like your experience is I bet you're going to remember that meal long after you've forgotten all the other ones you've been with your mates.
Yeah, I think so.
So I would say there's also I'm a big advocate for solo travel, but I'm also kind of conscious that I'm saying this as a man, and solo travel as a female is a little bit more difficult. You notice stuff because you've not got someone next to you. You see things, and I also quite like the idea of kind of picking up temporary friends, and then when you've had enough of them, you just wander off. That's a real. I remember just having a kind of pal for a day, and then being like, well,
never going to see you again. Yeah,
but you're not obliged to kind of hang around with them.
No,
take off early and take off early in the morning out of your hostel and slip out the door like Paul Simon. You can do it sort of that way, and it's and that's wonderful as well.
How do you see the future of pilgrimage or taking these meaningful journeys in a world that is increasingly sort of digital and fast-paced?
There's one example that you need to turn your attention to, and that's the Camino. I think a lot of people looking looking to go on the Camino now are looking at seeing something and thinking this is an ancient path that's been walked by people for centuries, and in joining it, I'm being part of a long-standing tradition, going to a holy place, and it's absolutely true, all of that. But I don't feel people recognise that the Camino has genuinely exploded in the last 40 years, and particularly the last decade. I think there's some statistic that in the 1970s, I think it was about a dozen people or 24 people walked the Camino. And then I think it was about 10 years ago that had got to 250,000. And this year it's projected to top 500,000. So this thing has not just sort of grown in popularity. It's genuinely erupted out of nowhere. I mean, obviously, yeah, it has a long history, but people are going on it probably. I couldn't put a finger on it, but I could say maybe the majority, certainly a large portion, are not practicing Catholics or not strict Catholics, might be from a Catholic background. I mean, a lot of them won't even describe themselves as Christian, but they are finding meaning in joining this path, and they're finding something resonates with them. And this is not a small group of the population. This is, coming up to 500,000 people annually. So that pilgrimage is kind of, addressing some spiritual need with people, even if they can't quite get on board with being a Christian or with being a Roman Catholic. And I think that is quite instructive, that, there is a need within people that you can see manifesting in this huge way. And it doesn't seem to be going away. We don't have anything quite like the Camino here in the UK. I mean, I would say that a lot of the popularity of pilgrimage routes on a very mundane level is down to the infrastructure there. It's down to, are there places to eat? Are there places to stay? Is there a waymarked path? Are there companies that can take me? Are there books about it? And we don't, our pilgrimage paths, if you think about something like St. Cuthbert's Way, it's a bit of a minnow compared to the Camino, but it is growing. These routes around the UK are getting more footfall than they have done in the past. I mean, I think the great lesson of that example I've cited with the Camino is that places fluctuate in their popularity. Some emerge suddenly and then sort of dwindle. The example in my book, I talk a lot about the Stonehenge Free Festival, which I think you could certainly say is a pilgrimage. And that kind of, explodes. This sort of city pops up around Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain in the 1970s and 1980s. And comes out of nowhere. This solstice gathering brings in tens of thousands of people. And then, by the late 1980s, it's gone. And I'd say, my generation, probably, Gen Y, we didn't even know it was ever there. It's a bit like, I've often used the example of a spring. It can dry up and then suddenly kind of come back again.
I think on a macro scale, I wonder whether the part of the reason why the Camino has become so popular is that, as we've become less connected with organised religion, certainly in the UK, whether we look for something that provides a sense of purpose and meaning that perhaps previously came through worship. I don't know.
I think that's absolutely right. I'd also say, if we're talking about pilgrimage in the UK, I mean, I often end up talking about this through the prism of a country that's lost its Christian faith, but is sort of looking to regain something through following these old Christian pilgrimage routes. That's often the way the conversation tends to go. But it's also like a little bit daft not to remember that vast numbers of people in the UK are going on purely religious pilgrimages. They will be getting on a flight to go to Mecca and to go to Medina. And that's not some kind of airy-fairy thing like what I'm talking about. That's a very committed Muslim pilgrimage. I mean, the biggest pilgrimage in the world is the Kumbh Mela in India, which happened earlier this year. And that's something of huge significance to Hindus. Like, it's not, religious pilgrimage is still very much alive and well in certain parts of the world. A lot of British citizens will be doing that in different places, and think about Islam, and that's part of, your commitment as a Muslim to get to that particular place. But yeah, it's certainly true that there are people who are looking for something bigger, and pilgrimage answers that for them in a way that, a book might not.
If someone wants to start their own sort of personal journey or pilgrimage, what might you suggest as a starting point?
I mean, I guess you kind of want to know what that person's, background are, what they're hoping to achieve, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
What I would say is that I think the British Pilgrimage Trust do an excellent job of kind of being advocates of pilgrimage as something, kind of separate but often attached to religion. They have an excellent website that has a large number of routes around the UK, and they have put out a wonderful book which covers holy places within the UK, and they're very approachable and very very wonderful organisation. So I think that's often a really good port of call.
Well, Ollie, once again, thank you, not just for the conversation today, but also for the book. I've read it and reread it, and I've told everyone that will listen to me about it. So I'm very, very grateful.
Oh, thanks very much. Well, I really do appreciate that. It's funny. You sort of like you wait a year for it to get published, and then you're like, oh, did I say all that stuff? It's quite funny.
Thank you for your time this morning. I've found it very thought-provoking and really interesting.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it. It's very kind.
I really appreciated Ollie's humility in all of the answers that he gave. Our journeys, however they show up in our lives, are personal, and it's not up to somebody else to tell you how you should feel or where exactly you should go. That's all up to you. And whether journeys are also similar in theme, like the journey of going to university, everybody's experience of that is going to affect us all differently. And actually meeting other people that have done either similar or different things to you and having those conversations, I think is really powerful. I also think one of the things that Ollie was talking about that really hit me was the need to be present to get the most out of the journeys that you're on. When you're on one of these journeys and, potentially doing something with a bit of a sense of purpose, being distracted by others or, the realities of the world that we can find ourselves in could potentially take away from that experience. And one of the stories that he has in the first chapter of his book, which is all about a pilgrimage of the tides, he's retelling one of the conversations that he had with a lady there called Nikki. And because this is a journey through tides, you have to be very aware of your surroundings, because you can either continue on your journey or you are going to get...
Or be cut off.
Exactly.
And find yourself in trouble.
Extremely stuck. What Nikki said in the book was, it's like juggling. All you have to do is be there and do this. Our lives are crowded with all sorts of media. Our heads are full of rubbish. And this simplifies everything. And I think that to embark on something where you really embody that and experience that feeling could be really powerful. So I feel inspired to try and, create a new journey for myself, whatever that might be, on a holiday or something different. But I'm going to really try and embody, those words from Nikki and also that presence that Ollie has spoken about in that conversation.
From the discussion, two things that really stood out immediately for me. The first is that this idea of what we take away from any journey of discovery comes not only from the external, the landscape, the people we meet, or the history of the place, but also from within ourselves, the internal, what we're needing or searching for at that moment, our own context, consciously or otherwise. And, that's similar in many ways to the hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell's story structure, which we at Just Add Water have often used, and anyone that knows us will know that, to help individuals and teams and organizations navigate periods of change and transformation. There were very many sort of parallels between what Ollie was talking about and our discussion and the hero's journey, the call to adventure, taking the first step, finding oneself in a brave new world, times of crisis, leaning on allies and enemies, arguably, the need for humility and a willingness to learn about others, and coming home somehow enriched, returning from this journey somehow with a richer experience of life, not just for ourselves, but then in turn for those people that are important to us. So, yeah, lots of parallels there. The other thing that struck me was this idea of going alone. I thought that was really thought-provoking. So the way this act asks us then to meet and trust others within reason, health and safety, and opens us up to new perspectives and different experiences and more.
Thanks so much for listening to the Being Human podcast. Do hit the follow button and leave us a review on whatever platform you're using.
As always, we would love to hear from you. So if you've got suggestions on topics you would like us to explore, or if you think you'd make a brilliant guest, or if you'd like to talk to us and our colleagues around the world about the work we do as Just Add Water, we would love to hear from you.
Please do get in touch and stick around for arguably one of the best bits of the podcast. The bloopers are coming up.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Being Human podcast. Brought to you by Just Add Water. Nurturing individual brilliance, forging collective strength.
That was a good thanks for listening.
It was good, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe we're getting good at this. Were you about to burst out laughing then?
No, I just didn't want to laugh over the top of you again, so I just held my mouth just in case. More energy.
No, I'm going to channel my inner Daniel Day-Lewis. I'm going to method this one.
Okay. Good luck.
What does it mean? Good. I got a laugh from Amelia. That's all that matters.